share tonight. Obviously, a lot of you probably have already heard him speak or had some connection with Agenda Weekly, but if you haven't, make sure you sign up out there for his materials and get in on the podcast and everything else. We're just so glad you're here. I am going to ask you, let's stand, we're going to pray, and I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn in just a moment. Again, bathrooms are straight out the back, and if you need some waters, we've got some out there for you. And we're just delighted that you come. If you get too cold, usually this unit back here blows on this side, this one blows on it. So, but usually this side gets too cold, this side gets hot, and God said if you're the warmer, cold or hot, well, about halfway through the speaking, y'all can switch sides if you want to. Anyway, we're so glad you've come. Thank you so much. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we bless you. We thank you, Lord, for your grace and your goodness. Thank you for your mercies that have followed us and do follow us all the days of our lives. Lord, we're grateful for our brother Curtis being able to come and his son. And again, we want you to be honored, glorified. Bless the fellowship, Lord, of everyone who has come tonight. And but then give us ears to hear. Give us ears to hear and hearts to receive, Lord, exactly what will be shared with us. And we just thank you for this privilege and opportunity. So bless these who have come, Father. We love you, and we bless you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. You can be seated. I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn Zimpler, and she is the lead of this Eagle Forum group. So, yay, come on, Marilyn.
Thank everyone for coming. It is an honor to be the action group leader for Eagle Forum, that I'm able to promote their foundational principles of faith, freedom, and family. It's not only my honor, but it's my privilege and it's a pleasure because I get to meet some of the most dynamic, interesting people that share these same values, and they're actually out on the front lines defending these values. Our guest speaker tonight has dedicated his life to defending truth and exposing injustice and deception. So many of you are familiar with him already. I have got some newcomers here that you're not as familiar with his work. So I'd like to read a brief bio to give you a better insight into his background and the passion he has behind his work. Curtis Bowers is a former Idaho State legislator and restaurateur. He is an award-winning filmmaker of Agenda, Grinding America Down, and Agenda 2, Masters of Deceit. He hosts the Agenda Weekly Show, an in-depth weekly report analyzing the agenda behind the news from a Christian conservative perspective. Curtis has traveled extensively across America for the past 15 years, seeking to wake the troops to the dangers of Marxist ideology, expose the left's long war against God, and equip the grassroots to push back. He and his wife Lauren have been married for 36 years, homeschooled their 9 children, and have 8 adorable grandchildren. It is a gift and it is a blessing to have Curtis with us this evening, and if you would, please give him a welcome.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to set this down here so it doesn't interfere. I appreciate you being here. Yes, it's a Friday night. There's always a lot of things to do on a Friday night. But I'm glad you came. I'm glad you care, because over your life, you've seen a lot of change in America, haven't you? Well, I, 15 years ago, made a film because as I dug into the change that had taken place, I realized it was purposeful. It wasn't an accident that America was collapsing from within. It was people and groups that for 100 years had been seeking to infiltrate and subvert and pervert from within so that we would collapse, and then they would be able to institute the socialist and then communist systems that they dreamed of. And so, how many of you, I always like to know this to kind of know who I'm talking to, how many of you have seen the entire film, Agenda, Grinding America Down? Okay, so just a few of you, okay? I've got two of my sons with me tonight, Chapman and Campbell. We, for about 12 years, traveled, all 11 of us, all over the country from 2010 to about 2021, just doing our part to try to help people understand that the reason everything we've seen that has happened is primarily our fault. I know that's hard to hear, but it is. It's the church's fault primarily, because as Pastor Tim knows, most pastors had pulled out, and they wouldn't speak the truth because they didn't want to offend. They didn't want to stand up against the wickedness in the schools or in the community, and so they just started hiding inside the four walls of the church. Starting back in the 1930s is when it really became prevalent, where most of the mainline denominations just said, oh, we better stay out of politics, stay out of the culture, and just keep Jesus inside the four walls of the church. Well, when you remove the light from society, what has happened to America is what happens. It always will happen. And it's never not happened. And so, but I've studied this extensively. I grew up in a family too, and I'll tell you a story at the end about my parents to help encourage you that even the little things make a huge difference. God took the little boys' loaves and fishes, and he fed the 5,000 men and their wives and their sons. He doesn't need much, but he needs whatever you have. And so I'll tell you that. But I'm going to show a short video here for a second, since my whole family's not here. But when I was a state representative and realized God wanted me to make a movie, which if you haven't made a movie, it's a big deal. I was very naive. I'd never made a movie, had no background in film, but I knew God wanted me to make a film. And I want to show you just a clip from the second film here, so you can see my family a little bit, but you can see how God can use any of us to accomplish great things if we're willing to obey. Q started over, just to get the volume up. Would motivate me to take my life savings and make a film. And I knew. In 2007, I was a state representative, and I had no idea the things I would discover about why America was collapsing from within would motivate me to take my life savings and make a film. And I had never made a film before. During the 2 years it took to finish the project, my children prayed daily that it would win the largest single cash prize film festival in America, which in my thinking was a mighty tall order. But of course, it wasn't for God.
The 2010 $101,000 grand prize for Best of Festival goes to Agenda!
God is so good. I'd like to thank him for just the wonderful wife he gave me. I don't think any man can even reach a fraction of his potential if he doesn't have the woman with him that God intended him to have for life. And I want to thank her. Kids, I'm giving this to you so you'll always remember God does answer prayers. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, what I'm going to speak on tonight is the Marxist communist threat. So many people think in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down, and 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved, that was the end. Communism's finished. Little did we know they just changed plans, and they realized it was much more effective to simply pretend you were dead and then keep infiltrating and subverting from within. This threat of communism that so many are ignorant of today, back in 1955, here's an excerpt from Time magazine, 1955, how they understood this threat. The conflict between communism and freedom is the problem of our time. It overshadows all other problems. This conflict mirrors our age, its toils, its tensions, its troubles, and its tasks. On the outcome of this conflict depends the future of all mankind. That's Time magazine. They understood if we don't stand up and stand against and expose, these people are going to take us over from within. As a Christian, as I studied this, it became crystal clear to me. We see in the Bible that Jesus had his disciples, and we all see that, and today he has his followers, and I hope you're one of those. And what do? We're here to make him look good. We're here to live in the way he told us to live. Why? So people can see he is real and they can see his ways work. That's what we're here to do. Well, I think we've been so naive for a long time to not realize, well, if God has his followers, don't you think Satan has his as well? Of course he does. And I think we've been exposed to a lot more of that over the last several years, from whether it's the Epstein stuff or the corruption we see where it's rotten from within. Well, as I've studied this, the communists are Satan's foot soldiers. The Bible tells us he came to kill, steal, and destroy. And that is all they have ever done in the history since Karl Marx forward. So we see, those are they're breaking down everything the way God intended it to be, because they know, as Satan knows, their commander-in-chief, everything will collapse when you do not do things God's way. And they want to take advantage of the collapse so they can step into power and have the totalitarian control that they dream of. Marxism is something that it seems like we wouldn't even need to talk about today after the history of the 20th century, when they slaughtered hundreds of millions of their own people in times of peace. It wasn't like the war stats. In times of peace, their own government slaughtered over 135 million that we know of their own people. So it seems like everyone would know that. But if you look at the average textbook today in any of our government schools, it hardly even mentions communism. All it talks about is Hitler, because they've tried to pretend he was on the right and the communists are on the left. All ideologies are on the left, because the left is 100% government and the right is 0% government, which is anarchy, which doesn't make sense. The conservative biblical worldview is just slightly to the right of center. But Nazism, socialism, communism, progressive are all on the far left, where there's 100% government. And there's hardly any difference between them. They just have slightly different veneers, but we've been brainwashed in the schools. No, it's evil on this side and evil on this side. And so they can say we're Nazis or whatever. No, they're Nazis, because they believe in totalitarian big government control of every aspect of your life. Vladimir Lenin, who, of course, was the founder of the Soviet Union. As a young man, he read the Communist Manifesto. And Karl Marx, unlike today where he's had so much influence, back then when he died, only 9 people attended his funeral. He was nobody. But a young man read his book and said, I'm going to do it. His life is pretty amazing, Vladimir Lenin. If you see, by the time he died, they'd enslaved about 1/3 of the world's population, with one guy having a vision of evil, but I'm going to do this. Well, I've read many of his books that he wrote, and he was a genius of strategy, how to manipulate people to think they're doing something that's going to help themselves, but really is helping you accomplish your goals. And one of the things he said here, and this is the root of Marxism, We can and must write in a language which sows among the masses hate, revulsion, and scorn toward those who disagree with us. Why is there so much division in our country? Because that's it. Even though most Americans would probably agree on about 80% of the things, there'd be just a couple issues we'd be different on. But no, that's why the young people just, think Trump is the Antichrist. Anyone that likes him is just evil because they've been brainwashed with this. It's the politics of revolution, and they are very good at that. He also said this, which is a key to understanding who they are. This is Vladimir Lenin. He said this. This is what they have done, and I'll give examples of then what he has done, but how they get where they can use whatever group you are. If you're a Christian, they're going to come to you as a Christian and manipulate you to believe Jesus was for this socialism. Jesus was, for big government programs to help the poor. That's not your job. It's the government's job. They're going to always twist everything. If you're a homosexual, we're going to fight for your marriage rights. We're going to, whoever you are, feminist, whatever, they're masters of this. But here he describes this over 100 years ago. Carefully, attentively, and skillfully take advantage of even the smallest fissure among the enemy. The smallest division. If one person thinks this and another one thinks this, try to get in that crack. And here's what you do. Seize even the smallest opportunity of gaining a mass ally, even though this ally be temporary, vacillating, unstable, unreliable, and conditional. Those who do not understand this fail to understand even a grain of Marxism. Vladimir Lenin. All we're about is the politics of divide and conquer and use. That's it. Even if it's someone, they're our main enemy and they're unreliable, that's okay. If we can use them to gain 1 inch of ground, we will do it. And that's what they have done. A lot of people today also don't realize, because of the Berlin Wall coming down, which they talked about in books years before that happened, they were going to do that. And because they were going to make it look like they were gone. And then the Soviet Union dissolving, which they talked about long ahead of time. Andropov, one of the heads of the KGB, had said that's our plan because they realized they couldn't outspend America. We had so much money, they realized the arms race thing, it was a losing battle. So they're going to pretend they're gone so they can get the funding they needed. Because communism doesn't work, that's why between 1917 and 1980, when Reagan came into office, they took over 50 plus countries because they have to. Communism doesn't work, so once you start running out of resources, you've got to capture another country so you can pillage the resources of that country to keep the thing going. Well, that's what they were doing, but they realized, okay, we're just going to continue with our subversion from within. But here's what he said in 1920, and it's still their game plan today. A lot of people think, it's totally their game plan with Red China and Russia and North Korea and Cuba. But here it is. First, we will take Eastern Europe, then the masses of Asia, China. We will encircle the last bastion of capitalism in the United States of America. We will not need to fight. It will fall as a ripe fruit into our hands. He knew all the things they were doing as they were penetrating Hollywood and the school system and the educational system and the info and the media and everything. He knew by the time we're ready to take America, we finally encircled them, they're going to fall from within. We won't have to fire a shot. And it's pretty amazing how accurate that was coming to be true. Their strategy, you need to understand, because they do the same thing every single time. And I've watched now and I've paid attention to things, and they're like, okay, that's a Marxist group. I can see their funding's coming from Marxist organizations, so I know what they're up to. And here's the 3 things you have to understand. They will always tell you where they are going. They don't hide like, they will. If you read their books, and that's all my movies are, I read their stuff. And they say, here's our plan to take down America. And you realize, and I went to a communist conference, and I went there and I sat there for 3 days in Berkeley, California, and I listened to them and I just took notes. They told you exactly what you're doing. And half of the people at that conference with me in 1992, When Obama became president, they were in his cabinet. And that's what made me make agenda. I go, those were the people at the communist meeting with me. Now they're sitting in the White House with all his top advisors. Were at that meeting, a communist meeting. And so I realized, and that's what God used to provoke me. Okay, I got a lot of people need to know about this. But they always tell you where they're going. They always state their purpose as the opposite of what it is. Every Marxist communist group, their stated purpose is the exact opposite of what it is. For instance, here's, as I was studying communist groups, one out of Chicago, which is almost funny, it's so ridiculous. This is a communist group funded, it was funded when it started straight from Moscow, everything else, in Chicago. It's called the Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights. I wonder how many conservatives gave them money. Of course, it's the opposite. It's the committee to make sure we can eliminate all rights and give them to government, which will tell people what to do. Well, another group that I had noticed a few summers ago, in 2015, a group called Black Lives Matter started. Well, I was watching all the Marxist things going on. I go, if they're telling us Black Lives Matter, I know that the purpose of that group will be to show black lives don't mean anything at all. And it was 5 years later till they did anything. I thought, I wonder what they're doing. Well, we saw in the summer of 2020, what did they do? The communists went in, stirred up the local black kids with the black, and got them to burn down their own town so they couldn't get a job, and they've defunded the police and they slip out in the night, the leaders, they're not going to jail, and let the young black people go to jail because they stirred them up into this violent revolution of destruction. But I knew that's what was going to happen. So when that summer started, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can see what they're doing. They came in to use the black community to create the chaos and destruction they love, because in the midst of chaos, government expands dramatically to solve the problems because people are like, please help us. The third thing they always do, they always accuse you of doing what they are doing. Why do they call you fascist? Because they're fascist. They're totalitarian in their ideology. Why do they call you racist? Because they're racist. And so but understanding that helps you understand who they are and what they're doing. So a quote again from Lenin, this is 1915, that will explain to you the George Floyd event and everything perfectly from 110 years ago. Socialists must explain to the masses that they have no other road of salvation except the revolutionary overthrow of their governments, and that advantage must be taken of these governments' embarrassments in the present war precisely for this purpose. So they were waiting in the shadows for anything that looked like police violence to happen, because they've already been talking about since the 70s in their groups and meetings and papers I've read, we have to start a movement to defund the police because that will cause crime to increase dramatically. And when people are in those kind of things, they will love the idea of communism. We'll come in and stop all of this foolishness. And okay, whatever, we just want this to stop. That's what they do. Another key movement, and I'm just going through a few of these so you see it's what Lenin said. They step in and they use groups. One of his sayings was this: the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. Think about that for a minute. So when they see something that could be against them, like the church, they say, we don't want to destroy the church. We want to lead the church, so we need to infiltrate and subvert it from within. And I'll talk about that particular movement in a second. But that's their strategy. Well, the whole environmental climate change, first global warming, cooling first, then warming, then change, because that's simple. That whole movement started in 1883, and it came from a paper written unbelievably by Karl Marx called The Dialectics of Nature, the last paper he wrote before he died a couple months later. And he said, we're going to use the environmental issues to say the pollution is blotting out the sun, we're not going to be able to grow crops, and we're all going to die. And in the 60s, the radicals got a hold of that and started pushing it. The first Earth Day in 1971, I believe it was. Do you know what day they picked to celebrate Earth Day? Vladimir Lenin's 100th birthday. This is read from the beginning. It's never been well-intentioned. Sometimes they will take a well-intended cause and hijack it and then use it to their ends. Other times they create it and fabricate it to begin with. But I want you to know, because whenever world government is instituted, it will be instituted under the guise of saving the planet. This issue will never go away. And the reason I know that is you cannot have a movement that grand sounding. What are you doing? Oh, I'm saving the planet. And step down to something else, you would lose the troops. So no matter how many facts we have against it, it will never go away. They will ride that horse until finally they've educated enough children to believe their lies. We're going to die if we don't do something. Well, they'll have the power to continue to do what they're doing right now, shutting down the farms, shutting down the use of fertilizer. So more and more people will be eliminated all over the world that depend on that food, and slowly creating the conditions for totalitarian control. But here's what you need to understand quickly, because you need to be knowledgeable on this, because so many good people have been sucked into this. I bet you have friends, you got to be careful. Here's the facts of the movement. The foundational premise of the entire environmental movement is CO2 is a pollutant. Well, if you didn't go to government schools like I didn't, that's laughable. CO2 is plant food. But here's what you have to understand. We don't have near enough of it in the atmosphere. It's the single most vital element of everything that exists for life on this earth, and we're at 400 parts per million right now. The optimum level for everything that is green is 1,600 parts per million. That's what they do in the greenhouses. They quadruple the CO2, and the plant growth efficiency, every time you double CO2, the same plant will produce 35% more crops. So if you can quadruple it, you're getting almost 100% increase in crop production from the same size plant. That's why a tomato plant inside a greenhouse will produce 85% more tomatoes than the exact same size plant outside the greenhouse. It's not a pollutant. It's fertilizer. But communists always do that. They teach you the opposite, so it's a bridge too far. When the young people have been brainwashed, CO2 is a pollutant, it's killing us all, they're getting ready to have these big carbon capture machines pump it under the ground. What will it do? It will cut CO2 levels worldwide. When you hit 150 parts per million, everything green dies. We're only at 400. They will not do that because God's not going to allow that. I know He's not. But I'm telling you, as they decrease it, even if they can get it down to 350, the yield from crops worldwide will drop dramatically, which will cut food, which will accomplish their number one goal of the entire movement, is depopulation of the earth. For 100 years, we have to depopulate the earth. Back when UNESCO started in 1945, the first founder said, that's what we have to do. Huxley said, we've got to depopulate. We need just a small handful of people to serve us, and everyone else needs to go. So that's all these agendas are to cut population. So what's the other lie of the global warming thing? Overpopulation. Well, if you talk to demographers or read some of their books, and demography is the science of populations, it's the opposite. We're getting ready, as soon as our senior citizens right now die off, there's no one to replace them, and the world population is going to start dropping forever. Because right now, there's 120 countries in the world that are not even having enough children to stay stagnant. They're below the 2.1 children per woman. So it's a total lie. And when you have declining populations, you have absolute, utter economic collapse. 100% of the time. Because you can't have a growing economy when you have declining populations. Everything becomes worthless. Like many villages over in Europe, half the homes are empty. No one even lives in them. Well, you think you're going to be able to sell your house when there's just empty ones sitting around? Because there's not enough people there anymore. They didn't have children. They, for 60 years, have not had enough children in Europe. That's why it's collapsing now. That's why they've had to allow the immigration of people that hate them. And they'll all be gone in 20 years. Every single European country will be gone. I mean, a lot of people don't get that. But again, it's demography. You see how many children the Islamic people are having, the people coming in that hate Western civilization and Christianity, and you see 0.7 in some of those countries. I mean, they're not having any children. Every time 2 people die, there's not even 1 person left to take care of the situation. So, but that's all part of the plan. The last thing they tell us is warming is bad. And I know on a hot day here in Alabama, I live in Alabama too, you think, I don't want it to get any hotter. But here's the reality. If you go down to the equator, I spent a summer down there helping some missionaries with my sister once. It's the hottest place on the planet. It's always hot, year-round. There's no winter. And you notice something real quickly. Life loves warmth. The biodiversity of plants and animals is unbelievable. They had insects I've never seen, plants, birds, monkeys everywhere. It was unbelievable. They had stuff there that couldn't survive in Alabama. No, we're just too cool. Our winters get too cool. It won't survive here. You go up to northern Alaska. I've been up there too. And you notice life doesn't like the cold. There's only a few species of trees that can even survive. Only a handful of animals that can even survive. So the whole lie is nonsense. Here's the facts. If we could warm the planet 2 or 3 degrees, which we cannot, our impact is almost nothing. It would be wonderful. You would have hundreds of millions of more acres of farm ground in Canada and Russia that we could farm. Hundreds of millions. So it would be a great blessing. And we've also, the scientists have studied when it does warm at all, it warms more toward the poles, not on the equator side. So it would be a great blessing. Anyway, those are things you need to be aware of. So when they say, oh, the planet's warming, say, oh, I hope so. That would be wonderful if it were. But it's all part of the game. Do you know what Mikhail Gorbachev did when he stepped down from the Soviet Union in 1992? First thing he did, he moved to San Francisco and started an environmental group called Green Cross International. And that's what he did the rest of his life, realizing that's the vehicle for world control and domination. All the communists went into the environmental movement. In fact, I flew up to Vancouver, British Columbia, to talk to Dr. Patrick Moore. Have you ever heard of him? He's the guy that started Greenpeace. So he cares about the environment. And I said, Dr. Moore, why did you have to leave the group you started? He said in the 1980s when the Berlin Wall came down, all the communists went into our movement. And I realized the things they were doing to save the planet were actually devastating to the planet. He goes, I really care about the planet. And he has an environmental group in Canada now trying to manage their beautiful forest up there, doing something productive. Realize we have so much of the wood is like the answer to so many things. We want to manage these forests. But he said, I had to leave because the communists took it over. I was shocked even when he didn't say liberals took it over, he said the communists took it over. And he's a liberal-minded guy, he's not a conservative guy even. But he saw that firsthand. He had to leave his own group. Then you look at the whole LBG, whatever, perversion. You dig into that. The first homosexual activist group in America started in 1950. I started looking, who are they? A guy named Henry Hay started it. Who's he? He was one of the leaders in the Communist Party USA. They started to break down the culture, break down family, break down tradition. And so that whole movement too. Here's one of the groups my movies talk about is a group called the Frankfurt School. And this quote right here is from 1932. Okay, talking about what they were going to do in our country here. It's pretty amazing. We as communists used to debate people about the existence of God. And after a while, I came to a conclusion that this was a waste of time. You aren't going to debate people away from the existence of God. But what we found was that if you can get young people involved in deviant sexual behavior, the whole idea of God just disappears automatically. 1932, Wilhelm Reich. Do you understand how evil that is? Because when you're sinning, you don't want there to be a God, because you know you're doing what's wrong. So you just get them in some kind of perversion or being immoral, and they're going to kind of not be as interested to going to church because they'll be convicted. They're going to be and God's going to disappear. That's 1932, how vile these people were in America. You know who brought the Frankfurt School to America? John Dewey, the founder of our government school system. And he put them down at all the top universities in America. to start rotting us from within, because he was a founding member of the Socialist Society in America, and they knew we cannot give the children a good education, because if we do, they will not fit, as he said, like cogs into the socialist machine we're creating. He knew if you have a bright, creative, happy, industrious young person, they're not going to be happy to have some government job doing nothing or whatever, or just a factory job where you do the same thing your entire life. And so we want to get kids where they're not very motivated and they're not doing much. Then you look at, and the whole trans thing too is the same thing. In the beginning, God created male and female. And these people's commander-in-chief is trying to destroy even that, the idea of that. No, there's 83 different genders. It's so crystal clear. There's nothing that's not being attacked that is the way God intended it to be. And that's what this battle is doing. The feminist movement, getting the women to believe you're going to have a much more fulfilling life working for some big corporation or for some man in the workplace, instead of being home and being the queen of your castle, like Phyllis Schlafly from Eagle Forum always talked about. She goes, I want to be in charge of my thing. I'm not going to go work for somebody else. I'm going to take care of my husband and raise my children and be influential in the community. But that was all a plan too. Betty Friedan, who wrote the book Feminine Mystique, she was acting like in that book that she was just discontent with being a wife and mother. But later it came out, her college papers were defending what Stalin did by killing 20 million people in the Soviet Union of his own people. She was a hardcore communist. But the sad thing is, I read that book for the first time in like 2008. It was so poisonous, I thought I wouldn't even let my wife read this book. She was so good at twisting and lying. And tens of millions of women listened to her, and they left. And they went to go find themselves in the world, only to wake up in their 40s and realize it's too late. It's too late to get married and have children and raise a family. I was lied to, and many of them, I've read many of their books and stuff too, how they just, I believed those lies. I went to find myself, and I just destroyed myself. And then I missed out on the years I could have raised the next generation. Why did they want to get the women out of the home? Ladies, do you know? Because your job is the single most powerful position in the world. Whatever your husband does is a joke compared to that. And of course, hopefully he's helping with that. But whatever, if you have some business or whatever, 1,000 years, is that going to know? But 1,000 years from now, or 100 years from now, when you have hundreds of great-great-grandchildren here, what you did to impart wisdom and truth and understanding will still be impacting this world long after you are gone. Only 4 women survived the first winter at Plymouth Plantation. And they say today in America, 35 million of their grandchildren are still here. From 4 ladies 400 years ago. They knew that. That's why they said, we've got to get these women away from the children so we can raise the children. We want that position. And it was a total lie by the communists. Then you look at, and this isn't popular to talk about, but you have to. The whole rock and roll culture, the drug, sex, and rock and roll of the 60s was a Marxist plot from the Frankfurt School. They set up many of the key players. Even James Dean worked with the Frankfurt School for the first time, having a character that's the bad guy be the good guy. And that was purpose. They realized we need to break that down, because in every movie before then, the good guy's the good guy and he wins in the end. And the bad guy's exposed for being evil and he loses. Well, they started to break that down. But even John Lennon himself of the Beatles, I found articles in 71, 72, where they were interviewing him in Moscow in the Red Star newspaper. And they were saying, what are you doing to break down the culture? So he goes, we're creating with the drug, sex, and rock and roll, we're working toward the communist revolution. His song, Working Class Hero, was the song for the American Communist Revolution. We're going to get the working class guy to rise up and kill off the bourgeoisie and have our paradise forever. So he was a hardcore communist, and that's what they were about. And so here's what happened. And Mick Jagger was too openly, I can't get no satisfaction. And a lot of people go, I like those songs. those songs were poison, though. You might like them because they appeal to your flesh, but they were poison. And here's the truth why I bring this up, because it happened to several of my friends, but millions of young people are in their graves today because they followed those Pied Pipers into the drug, sex, and rock and roll. And several of my friends it happened to as well. They died in the 80s. And so I'm just telling you, it was poison, but they knew they'd package it in a package that appeals to the flesh. But that's what it was about, to break down the culture. Then you look at the church today, as I talked about briefly. In 1954, the Committees on Un-American Activity in our Congress went and interviewed one of the top communists that had left the Communist Party in America. And they asked him, and you can read the congressional record, what have you guys been doing? He said, the number one thing we've been doing since 1930 is penetrating and influencing the seminaries and divinity schools. We've gone to the seminaries, got our degree, and then stayed on as the professors to take over the church. That's what you wonder why the church, why is the church so pathetic? The guy doesn't even open the Bible half the time, or doesn't know what's going on. It was all purposeful. If we get the seminaries, then we got the pastors. If we got the pastors, we got the church. It's the same thing they did in education. Most of them didn't become teachers in our schools. They went to the teachers' colleges, so they're teaching the teachers. And then they have much more influence. If you teach thousands of teachers over your life and they teach thousands of kids, you're going to influence a lot of people. And that's what they did. They always were doing that. I remember just a year or so ago, on our college campuses, some of the protests and things going on. Some people I know that know I studied communism, they were at one of those rallies on the Palestinian thing and everything. They were there, and the communist groups were handing out flyers, organized the Intifada, a communist program for escalating the Gaza solidarity movement. And inside it talked about what they're going to do to try to get it to turn violent if possible and everything else. But I go, these people, they don't miss a trick. They see kids stirring up over anything, they're going to be in the middle of it. And if kids aren't stirred up over anything, they'll get them stirred up over something. They want to use the energies, especially of young people. Why? Because young people are very easy to manipulate because they're naive. They haven't lived long enough to see, oh, everything that looks good isn't good, and everything that sounds good isn't good. They don't know that, so they're very easy to use. All those things, I just briefly touched on many, and especially the rock and roll, is what they used to create that rebellion in the 60s and